Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Visual Studio Toolbox, live from the studio, and I guess pre-recorded from where you're sitting. So I'm your host, Leslie Richardson. Today I'm joined by pretty much a regular at this point, Phil DePixie.
Hey.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back.
Cool, yeah. Happy to have you back again. So for the uninitiated, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And what we're gonna be
sure.
talking about?
So my name's Phil. As you said, I'm my day job is I'm the CTO for one of the largest law firms in the U.S. A lot of data, a lot of applications, but I'm also a fairly prolific speaker. I speak at all the VS Live events and some regional conferences as well. Written a bunch of books and love coming on with you and Channel 9. We just did a show, time travel here, right? So I'm not sure when you all are watching this, but we did a show, an hour-long show on versioning and documenting APIs recently.
That was super cool. That doesn't feel long. It feels long ago and yet not. When did we do that? Like June?
We did late June, early July.
Jeez, where's the summer gone? At least at the time of this recording.
Yeah.
Wild. Yeah, and actually VS Live is happening right now. So I'm assuming you've got a couple talks going on. That's wild. Sweet. So thank you for taking the time to come to the studio. That's actually how we got all these people in the studio for the next couple episodes that you're probably going to be seeing. Like everyone happened to be in town for VS Live, so we thought we'd kidnap a couple.
Yeah,
of you, so.
No, absolutely.
Sweet. So thanks for being here. So what's the topic of today?
Well, I think a good topic to talk about for those of you who might not be using it are creating custom tag helpers, as well as using view components. And if you don't remember what a tag helper is, we're kind of looking at some right now if we have the screen showing. But let's look in code at this, for example. So here's a form tag helper, and you see we've got these ASP dash items here. And what this does is creates the route, if you will, for that form submission, right? And passing in the variables, and then there's ASP4 on the input. So I'm not going to go into all the tag helpers, but just to remind people what a tag helper does is execute server side. So to be clear, we're not talking about Blazor. This is MVC or Razor pages, web applications, right? Server side execution, which then gets rendered and delivered to the browser. Mm-hmm. So it will change the shape of the tag, right? So that's why it's a tag helper, or completely change out the tag, right? So for example, there's the environment tag helper that you can use to determine whether or not different HTML gets loaded. So what I'm going to show you is some custom tag helpers that we actually use in real life, right? It adds a nice consistency to it. To your application. And if you look, these are very ugly. I'm not a graphic designer, but the ones that we use in real life are a little prettier. But you'll see as we go into these different screens that we have this consistent, right, tag. Consistently ugly, but it's okay, right?
It's not that bad.
And so I'm going to show you how to build those. The other thing that's really, really important to understand are view components. So what a view component is, again, we're talking MVC and Razor pages, is a chunk of code that executes server side and is partnered with client side. So it's kind of like child actions from MVC5, right? And then partial views. And what this allows us to do are things like a dynamic menu. So we're going to look at how we do this, but here's my dynamic menu of all the makes in the database. It brings down a menu item for each of those. Mm-hmm. So let's start with the tag helpers.
Okay, let's do it. Can you explain briefly what a tag is?
A tag is an HTML element.
All right, cool. Just so we're on the same page.
So, all right, let's stop running. We'll have in the show notes the repo so you all can look at this code when you want to. And then, we have a pretty tight resolution here, so it kind of jars me a little bit, but let's find where the tag helpers are. All right, we're going to start with MVC. There's a little bit of difference in how they work, right, in the actual implementation of my tag helpers. But let's look at a generic tag helper, item create tag helper. So in this case, I'm inheriting from tag helper, but I made a base class for the common functionality. But let's go back to the non-base class, and there's one method we care about, and that's called process. So when a tag helper gets called in code, and typically it's from another view, right? Then process is what happens. And so what I'm doing here is I'm calling into a base class, passing in some different properties. And let's look at the really, the guts of it. So here in, let me make this bigger. There we go. So output is what we need. Tag helper output. That's what gets rendered. Okay. So here I'm actually changing the tag. So the tag itself is going to have a different name. It's not going to look like an HTML element when I put it in the code, in the markup. But I'm saying, no, this is really an anchor tag. Then I'm setting the target. And what I'm doing is I'm using ASP.NET Core MVC routing to do this, right? So it's building the route that it should go to. And then there's the href getting set on the anchor tag, setting the class name, and then I'm setting the display text, and then using Font Awesome to add the little icon.
Cool.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So how do we use this now that we have this work going? How do we tie it into our actual page? And it's that easy, right? So the way that tag helpers get rendered is it's the name of the tag helper minus the tag helper suffix converted to lower kebab casing. I always get a kick at that name. So imagine these words, you separate them with dashes and they're on a shish kebab. So it's lower kebab casing, okay? So if we want to see a bunch of these in action, excuse me, let's go to our car list. That's what we were looking at on the main page. And here's my item edit, my item details, my item delete. And that matches over here, right? There's my delete details edit. The list is item list we saw on the other page, and then here is our item dash create. Now, any properties you want to pass into this tag, they are also lower kebab cased.
Okay.
Right? So what we do is we look at the tag helper, and here's the edit. Let's go over to the edit tag helper, and we'll see that there is, it's actually on the base. I thought about taking the base out, but then I'm like, I'm not really showing the power if I take the base out. But there's the item ID, which again gets converted to lower kebab casing. Okay, and that's it, right? And so when we're running this, we're going to run both the MVC and the Razor Pages app. So here we have our tags. And what we can do is we can show that we go into our code, and let's go into, and we'll go into the delete, and we say the display text is delete 2, right? And we'll just leave it at that, save it, do a lukewarm reload. I'm sorry, I call it lukewarm because it doesn't always work.
We're working on it.
And now you can see that everywhere where there's a delete tag helper, it updates it.
Cool. So I know we're not in Blazor right now, but this is kind of giving me a components.
It is a component. So the Blazor equivalent would be a component.
Cool.
Right. The difference here, and you can certainly write a piece of JavaScript to do this, or even just make a partial view to do this. Mm-hmm. But with the partial view, it's going to be a little more complicated to actually get the routing put together. So let's look at the actual main part of this, and that's this right here. So we're passing in a context assessor, right? So we can get into the action context. So whatever context this is running under, we can then use the URL helper to build the route. So that's how we get the link.
Gotcha.
So when are we still running? We are still running. So if I hover over this, you can see down in the bottom, I'm not entirely sure I can blow this up and have it stay on the screen. Oh, I can.
Sweet. Right,
so there's the route that gets created. So I don't have to hard code this. I can plug this anywhere in my app and it just knows where to go. Mm-hmm. Right, so that's the advantage of using a tag helper, because you get that server-side brains and the view.
Totally, the reusability, of it all. Yep. It's great.
In the bigger demo of this that I actually did for you, not this last show, but a prior show, you'll see that I've got an area in this, and I just use the same tag helpers, and it knows that it's in an area and just works. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's great. I love it when things just work.
Yeah.
Like having to manually do all that extra work that's just tedious when you don't need to do it.
Well, and it's, you're always going to have a situation where somebody looks at it and somebody says, oh, I don't like that color yellow. Can you change the color yellow, right? It's the same thing with, now you can handle with CSS also, but now I've got one place for every edit icon is handled right here.
Cool.
All right, let's just look briefly at the difference. So here's how we're building the route. What we have to do in Razor Pages, and again, this code will all be available, It is available, you just don't know where yet. And we look at the base here, and you see that what we are doing is we're actually doing the URL helper to go to a page. So that's the main difference. How we get there is the same.
Yep.
Right? But that's why I couldn't have a shared project for this.
Yep, that makes sense.
So let's look at view component. Any questions on that?
No, that's great.
Okay. Let's look at view components. And again, I mentioned that here's our menu. It's dynamic. I can add a make and it'll run. And here's the difference. Yes, we can have code in our either Razor page or controller action to go into the database, get the views, pass it into temp data, and then use temp data to pass it to the layout. But the layout in both MVC and Razor pages doesn't have any server-side component. So every single action method would have to remember to get that data to then present it as temp data to the layout to then display. Well, think of if you've got like a shopping cart, right? You're an e-commerce site and you want to have in the lower corner, here's your current cart, buy now type thing. That's a lot of remembering to do this on every single page. So what we want is we want a chunk of code that will do two things. Run on server side. In this case, we're calling into a database. Actually, in this case, we're calling into a list because I didn't want to hook it up to a database and complicate the demo. But typically, you'll do that. And then, so let's look at that. And we have a folder in here. Let me just minimize everything and go back into MVC. And here's our view components, our menu view component. And the naming convention is typically something component or something view component, like we have controllers and pages, and you inherit from view component. There's other ways you can land here, but that's pretty much the standard. One of two methods, invoke or invoke async. You don't do both. Right? And depending on whether it's an async method or not, you pick which one. Yep. Again, in this case, it's a fake service, so I just do invoke, but I have the sample in here if you wanted to make it async. And so here I am getting all of the makes. If I don't have any, I return a message that says unable to get the makes. Obviously, you should have a better message than that, but it's demo code. Then I return a view, and this is a partial view, and it's called menu view, and I'm passing in the makes as the view model. Now this code is going to work exactly the same on both because a view component in Razor pages is the same as a view component in MVC.
Okay.
So it's not a page, right? It's part of the layout system,
right?
Or however you want to plug it in. Now let's look at the menu view. Now there's this C# code that we're looking at can live anywhere. Could be in a different project. It could be anywhere. You just has to have access to it, and it has to be able to. View component is in the ASP.NET Core package, so you have to have the references, but there's no restriction.
Okay.
The reason I call that out is the actual view has a restriction. It has to be in a folder named components and the name of the view component without the view component suffix. And it has to be either in the shared, so in MVC, you're either looking at the controller, like Cars controller, you have a folder there, or the shared folder. Typically, they go in the shared folder. But if they're not in the shared folder, and they're not in the current executing controller folder, it won't find them.
Okay.
So I can't have this in the shared. It specifically has to be in one of three places.
Right.
And I only mentioned two. You're like, you said three.
Yeah, you did say three.
The third? Go ahead.
I am curious on a related note, because it's been a minute since I've done like a Razor page or MVC, if you used a template project, does it already set that structure out for you? Or is that something that you need to figure out?
I don't think the template project includes view components.
Okay, I didn't know if it did or not, but.
I mean, just a standard like file new project? No, it doesn't set it up.
Okay, cool.
Okay. You could create custom templates, which has got me a little. So on the Razor pages, we do pretty much the same thing. But instead of views shared, it's pages shared, components, view components. And if you don't have it in that location, it will yell at you loudly.
That bugs me because it makes more sense for it to just be in view. Just because views in the.
But that's, I don't know why. They didn't ask me when they made the rules.
They should have asked you.
So, you know what we can do? We can actually move it. No, we can't when we're running. because people might be watching this going, pause it, I want to take notes. And it didn't move. Oh, Visual Studio.
What's it say? It's unexpected.
One or more files, this operation might take a long time. Yes, it says, I am running preview. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to do this. All right, and we're going to run. And this is the Razor Pages application that I broke. I have both started. I'm using the new multi-star profile.
Cool.
So here's my MVC. Everything's happy. Here's my rate. It didn't save the changes. All right, so much for going off, coding. I was trying to, believe me, if you get it wrong, it will tell you.
I was going to say, it's like it's not yelling yet, so it's.
Unless somebody at home is going to be like, oh, they fixed it. It can be anywhere.
Right. Don't you love it when you actually deliberately want to break something for demo purposes?
Yeah,
and it
so
doesn't do it?
it's not really an edit point. It's just curious to me. And what I'll do is I can probably write it up and figure out what's going on. Maybe they've changed it. I don't think they have. I think it's me trying to go off script and do something ad hoc.
No worries. So what was the expectation there?
The expectation would come up with the big yellow screen of death.
Great.
And say, looked for menu view and looked in these locations, but couldn't find it.
Cool. You're talking about in the web browser.
In the web browser, yeah. It's not a compile time error, it's a runtime error.
Yeah, it is yelling about menu view, at least.
Okay, now I am motivated.
Break, 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 break.
There it is.
Hey, all right. Not yellow, but pretty black. But
yeah, that's because I have dark theme.
Yeah.
The components menu view, this is not here, was not found. The following locations were searched. So those are the places it searched. So menu 2 should have failed.
Right.
Right, but it didn't. So there is, we talked about it on our last show, right? So if you have now that I'm thinking about it, if you have a number after a controller, it ignores the number, right, when you're using versioning. So it could be something along those lines. So, all right, and that's the error. So again, there's a couple sources or a couple reasons to use this that we mentioned. Certainly this is a dynamic menu. You can have a shopping cart, but something we use all the time is we've got very complicated permissions for our applications, right? If you're an attorney, you can see this much. If you're paralegal, you see less. And the menu is, again, in the layout, which has no code behind it. So we actually have view components that will check your permissions against the database.
That's good.
Right? And then that way we also don't have to worry about permissions being cached.
Awesome.
Like if somebody gets let go and they still have access for 20 minutes, it's usually a problem.
Yeah.
So we'll do that with, dynamic menus where we're checking anytime you need to check the server.
That's really cool. And then I'm assuming ideally you can start making view components out of or have like nested view components within that scenario, or is that
I didn't show you how to use it. Yeah, that was a great call. I don't think you can do nested, and maybe I don't understand it, but to plug it in, I literally do that. View component, VC, colon menu. But to use it as a tag helper like this, I'm glad you mentioned that because it made me think. We have to go into view imports, and we have to add tag helper, and we say add all of them that you find, and then the name of your project. So this is in the Razor Pages project demo.razor, and then we have the same thing in the MVC project. If you don't do this, and you try and add it as a tag helper like this, and this is why I was like, can you really nest them? I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say I never tried, because it just made me think. Because now I have my menu, partial view. I could probably put a tag helper or a view component in there. So I'm gonna say probably. I've just never tried.
Cool. Well, call to action, y'all. Try it. See what happens.
So that's what I got.
Cool. That's awesome. I think that's pretty straightforward. Talking about, it's nice seeing how like kind of the components equivalent over on the Razor side of things. I'm so deep into the Blazor side these days.
There's one other thing I'll call out, and this is really slick.
Mm-hmm.
So in the tag helpers, let's go back to the tag helpers real quick. And if we look at the base, I have this thing called tag helper. No, it's in here. The tag helper context, which I'm not using here. But the tag helper context allows you to do things like, so you've got the context that it's running under. So you can get the view model, the class. Mm-hmm. So I actually wrote a tag helper that, like ASP-4, that you use on an input, or a label, right, where you say ASP-4, give me a label for this property, and it goes find the display name. I actually use that to look at the metadata of the model that it's tag helping. We'll call that a verb. And then if it's required, so it's a non-nullable property or it has a required tag on it, I update the label to have a red asterisk. So all my developers need to do, or myself, is do label for, because ASP-4 is already used, so I just call it label for, and then it'll go and put the red asterisk in the UI if it's required. And if the definition of the model changes, they don't have to remember to update the view. So you also have access to the entire model. Like, I'm showing a very rudimentary thing, but there's really powerful things you can do with those custom tag helpers.
Perfect. Yeah, that is a lot of really great functionality. So that's exciting to see. And I know you alluded to being able to access this entire repository, as well as, I'm sure, a number of other pieces of documentation and resources. So Phil, where can people go to learn even more about tag helpers and view components?
Certainly Microsoft Learn. I almost said Microsoft Docs, but I'm finally learning.
I know, I struggled to get that right,
too.
It
was docs.asp.net for the longest time.
It was,
Well, that still redirects you, so you can still do that. Certainly my book, it's a couple years old now, but I go into great detail. I actually build all these out in my book. And then certainly lots of, you can see our shows that we did in the past around ASP.NET Core and MVC and Razor.
Yeah, we'll definitely try to link some of those because, some of them have been very recent.
Yes.
Okay, like June, which feels like 6 months ago. But
yeah, it does.
I don't know what time is anymore.
So
cool. Well, Phil, thank you so much. As always, I'm sure we will see you again in the near future.
Absolutely.
Yep, looking forward to the next greatest topic from Phil. So to all of y'all, go try out tag helpers and view components. See if the nesting works and report back. And with that, thanks everybody and happy coding.
Yep, thank you. See ya.